Willy Ker has sailed over 100,000 miles in his Contessa 32 Assent, mostly single-handed and often in high latitudes. He's one of those people, up there with Tillman, who occupies an almost mythical status. I've seen pictures of him at the helm of Assent, dwarfed by glaciers, and heard tales of his adventures. I never imagined that one day I would meet him, much less be the owner of his boat, although I don't really like that word, owner. I feel we're more correctly the keepers of Assent. She will always be Willy's boat. Maybe surprisingly, Willy didn't grow up sailing. He was an engineer in the army. He served in Burma in the Second World War, and I was interested to know how he had got into sailing. His answer soon revealed his sense of adventure and his love of cold climates.
Yes, we were lucky that, of course, when Germany capitulated, or whatever you like to say, we took over a lovely collection of boats in Kiel.
Oh, I see, right.
So we had all the 30 square metres, a couple of 50 square metres, 100 square metres.
Yeah.
And really I learned to sail on all those.
Okay.
But I was an ordinary bog standard sapper in those days. When I then did a university course, and one of the things I did was survey, and they asked for volunteers to go to Canada, based in Ottawa, but did a survey up on the west coast with horses, and I thought up a nice little wheeze to do a winter trip with dog teams. So I levelled from Slave Lake to Bear Lake in the winter with sort of temperatures down to 20 below, which was quite interesting.
It wasn't mapped properly before?
Well, I mean, no, not that part of Canada was pretty sketchy, frankly. Quite interesting, really, because at one stage we'd gone up a chain of lakes up to Great Slave Lake, from Slave Lake to Great Bear Lake, and surprise, surprise, we found that Great Bear Lake was roughly the same height as Slave Lake, and I established a new height for Great Bear Lake. We were then going to fly across to Port Franklin at the top of the Bear River to go down to join up with the Mackenzie, and halfway across we were in a whiteout and stooging along and hit the ice and bounced off. And we were incredibly lucky that at that point the ice was smooth and we just took off again. And
So what, the plane?
Because we'd flown alongside the top of the Bear Mountain, which I think is about 1,000 feet above the lake. And obviously in flying across the lake we just lost altitude in the whiteout and finally went plonk onto the ice and took off again. Well,
you've had more than your share of 9 lives, I think. After leaving the army, he returned with his wife Veronica, raising their children on their farm in Somerset. It wasn't until 1976 that Assent came into their lives, and in the early days he and his son Alan cruised and raced her. In 1977 they did the Fastnet, with Willy at the helm, and in 1979 it was Alan's turn. Just 23 at the time, and with a young crew and no VHF, they somehow managed to get around the course, the only boat to finish in Class 5 when so many others foundered and lives were lost. It put Assent and the Contessa 32 on the map. It was whilst racing around Britain and Ireland in 1978 that Willy first thought about heading further north. His first extended cruise was to the Faroes. Then followed a circumnavigation of Iceland, and for the next 10 years he would return again and again to these latitudes, mapping and writing what would become the Royal Cruising Club Guide to Greenland, Iceland and the Faroes. There was more racing, another round Britain and Ireland race, and a transatlantic before Willy finally turned his sights south. Then in his mid-60s, just when most people are thinking about retiring, and maybe a spot of gardening, Willy headed for Antarctica. And it was en route to Antarctica that he met the Ponce family whilst cruising around the Falklands.
When I was in the Falklands, I needed to dry out, and the only place which had a decent tide was right out in West Falkland.
Yeah.
At Sarah and Jerome's Island.
Beaver Island, isn't it? Yeah.
So I sailed out there, and sailing up the channel towards the landing stage, I was met by carcasses floating by, each one with a karakara pecking away at it. They were trying to slaughter a whole lot of old rams, and when I got there, I think they had half a dozen left, and they were trying to kill them with a 2.2 rifle of all things. And I said, for God's sake, give me a knife. And I jumped in the pen and cut all their throats, and there was blood everywhere. And I still got the pair of oilskins that I was wearing at the time covered with blood. That's how I got to know Sally Ponce. Sally.
And that's how you met her, literally. You never met her before. You just jumped into a pen and slaughtered her around. That's great.
Yeah, I had a very nice stay there.
One of the most interesting things about Willy is that although many of his voyages were single-handed, there's never the sense that this was particularly important to him. He's not someone who you feel needs to prove anything, to himself or anyone else. If there was someone to go with him who he liked, he'd take them. If not, he would do it alone.
And how many of your voyages were single-handed?
An awful lot of them. Quite extraordinary, really. I just hoped for the best, perhaps a little unwisely. I mean, on one occasion, going across the Pacific, I'd been swimming amongst the coral and picked up a rather nasty bug. I sort of sailed for quite a long way across the Pacific down below. I was knocked out completely. Took a whole lot of antibiotic pills and hoped for the best.
As with many of Willy's voyages, there was never any great game plan. One trip led to another, and as one chart opened up, more possibilities became apparent. One of his favourite voyages, en route from Antarctica via Easter Island, Hawaii and Alaska, involved trucking Assent across Canada and then sailing through the chain of the Great Lakes back to the Atlantic.
When I got the boat back in the Great Lakes at Duluth, a couple came down on the beach on the pontoons there as I was rigging the boat, and she said, "Oh, that's an awful small boat to go out on the lake." I didn't like to tell her how I got there.
Before I met Willy and heard about his largely single-handed exploits, I imagined a very different, perhaps even an insular sort of character. Talking to him, I found a man with a great sense of fun, who I can only imagine was a wonderful sailing companion, if he could take the pace.
The bloke who was in the port bunk flew over and landed in my lap, and I asked him afterwards what was his recollection. All I can remember is saying, "What the bloody hell are you doing in my bunk?"
What did he say? I don't know.
Yeah, well, he reckoned he'd had enough. When we got to Ireland, he said, "Well, I think I've got better things to do," and jumped ship.
I was particularly intrigued to learn how Willy's wife, Veronica, had taken to her husband heading off for so long, over such a long period of time. Again, my preconceptions were shattered. If I'd expected a long-suffering wife waiting anxiously at home, nothing could be further from the truth. Veronica had joined Willy on many a happy occasion, and in the meantime got on with her own considerable achievements.
So how did you feel about him going off for 20 years?
I didn't go off. I mean, I was always home.
Oh yes, always
in
home.
between.
Yes, that's right. No, I mean, it freed me up to do a lot of things with the horses.
She was quite a decent dressage rider.
Oh. But you obviously have enjoyed your sailing as well.
Oh yes.
And so we come to our own chapter with Assent. What will we do to her? How will we keep the essence of her, whilst making her fit for her new life as a family cruiser for Kit, me and our 4 young boys? One thing's for sure, we will be changing the engine for a bigger, more powerful beast.
I'm aware of the fact that I've probably got rose-tinted spectacles because
Well, yes,
I look at her and I think, God, she's
pretty disgusting down. I mean, you're going to have to rip up the floor and put in a new water tank. I mean, that's...
So what did you do for water? Did you just drink it?
I went to a lot of trouble in Greenland to find clear springs coming from the glaciers. So I always carried 2 or 3 big cans of fresh water when I was in Greenland.
Oh, okay.
Never used local water supply. Absolutely disgusting.
Oh, really? Okay. And certainly not from Assent's water tank.
Oh, definitely not.
Okay. Well, that's good to know because Kit's been saying to me, "Oh, Jessie, you're so fussy. Willy obviously drank from this all the time." And I was like,
You're dead wrong. No, I haven't used the water tank in 100 years.
Okay. That's funny.
No, one works out of ways of doing things.
Have you ever had an occasion where the 10 horsepower has not been able to get you out of a situation? I mean, it's strong enough to...
Oh, I would never use the engine to get me out of a situation.
You wouldn't?
No.
So how do you deal with that if you're...
Well, you don't get into that situation.
You just don't get into it?
Well, frankly, I mean, a 10 horsepower engine isn't much good to you, really. That was designed to operate in Antarctica, where you wouldn't be able to refuel.
Yeah.
So I had that tank, and I had a whole lot of cans as well.
In my own travels at sea, I have on more than one occasion felt afraid of the waves, that the boat might hit some unseen object floating under the surface, just of my own vulnerability in the face of such vastness. My last question to Willy was whether he had ever felt frightened.
Perhaps I'm insensitive, but once you've almost fallen off a mountain, you've landed pancaked on the ice in a whiteout in a plane, and you know that another plane has done that, and the pilot and the passenger were killed. Perhaps your feelings are a bit blunted, I don't know. One's been through all sorts of tribulations, really.